HOA built 400 homes on my grandpa's farmland. They walked right into my trap. Picture this. Dust devils spun across the fractured asphalt of the former driveway, taunting Elijah's lurching progress in his battered pickup. Harmony Acres pressed in on both sides, rows of near-identical beige houses like a mouthful of capped teeth. He'd anticipated the cookie-cutter aesthetic, of course, studied the brochures promising community and effortless living. Still, nothing could have inoculated him against the sheer, airless conformity. The farmhouse seemed diminished, a forlorn holdout on its scruffy patch of lawn. Swallowed by Harmony Acres' manufactured perfection, it was a stubborn briar in a field of synthetic turf. Paint peeled like flaking plaster, and the porch sagged under a burden of abandonment. He killed the engine, and for a moment, only the drone of crickets broke the stillness, a chorus amplified in the unnerving quiet. The air hung thick with clipped grass mingling with an artificial sweetness he couldn't quite define. The scent of oblivion, he realized with a pang. The very essence of erased history. Elijah slammed the truck door, each footfall a dull throb. He ran his palm along the aged siding, tracing the ghosts of faded green. He could almost hear Grandpa Harding's yarns about each imperfection, each knot, declaring them the hallmarks of a life well lived. Now, all he registered was decay. He glanced back at the development. Immaculate rectangles of lawn, robotic rose bushes on parade, and gleaming SUVs lined up like obedient soldiers. They had paved over paradise, sure, but more than that, they'd obliterated his past. A jolt of anger, keen and biting, surged through him. He fished the key from his jeans, the cool metal a small anchor in the rising tide of emotion. The lock resisted, protesting years of disuse. He wrestled with it, the tumblers clicking with a desolate finality. Inside, the air was heavy with dust and lingering echoes. The familiar aroma of cedar and aged paper snagged at him, pulling him back to endless summer days spent in the attic, helping Grandpa mend fences, absorbing the unspoken language of the land. He moved through the rooms, each a catalyst for cascading memories. The threadbare armchair where Grandpa spun bedtime tales, the kitchen table where they shelled peas and bartered secrets, the window overlooking fields where he'd first learned to pilot a kite. He paused at the back door, staring out at what had once been the soul of the farm, the rich soil, the sinuous creek, the ancient oak that had witnessed centuries unfold. Now, all was erased, replaced by a regiment of look-alike dwellings, each sporting its own meticulously manicured square of green. A memory crystallized, sharp and poignant, Grandpa Harding, his face a roadmap of wrinkles, kneeling in the soil, patiently identifying soil types. "This land, Eli," he'd rasped, his voice rough with reverence. "It's alive. It breathes. You gotta listen to it. Respect it." Elijah squeezed his eyes shut, the weight of those words a crushing blow. He hadn't listened. He hadn't defended it. And now it was gone. He opened his eyes, his gaze resolute. "Not entirely vanquished," he amended. "Not yet." He marched back to his truck, a plan germinating in his mind. A long shot, a dangerous gamble, but the only path he could envision to honor his grandpa and reclaim what had been plundered. He popped the trunk, revealing its contents: shovels, pickaxes, a roll of heavy-gauge fencing, and sacks of fertilizer. Meager, perhaps, but a start. A seed of rebellion planted in the barren earth of Harmony Acres. The tranquility of Harmony Acres was about to be shattered. The fine print. Dust and the faint scent of forgotten promises clung to the air inside the county courthouse. Light, filtered through enormous arched windows, danced with floating particles liberated from aging documents. Elijah suppressed a cough, adjusting his collar. He'd envisioned this place as a scene from legal dramas, all reverent silence and leather-bound volumes. The reality was a stale-aired repository of bureaucratic missteps, a far cry from romance. He located the property records room tucked deep within a poorly lit hallway. Metal filing cabinets, rank upon rank, receded into shadow, their labels faded whispers of names long past. He began with the Harding Halliday section. A chill seemed to emanate from the metal as he delved into the files, each drawer emitting a mournful screech as he pulled it open. The afternoon dissolved into a blur of deeds, plat maps, and easement agreements. His eyes burned, a dull ache pulsing behind his temples. At last, he unearthed Grandpa Zeke's original deed, its flourishing script a relic of an era when land was paramount. And then, he saw it, a rider, appended to a seemingly innocuous water rights agreement from 15 years prior. A knot of dread tightened in his stomach as he navigated the legalese. Buried within paragraph 7, subsection C, was a clause granting the HOA temporary easement for utility maintenance across a sliver of the Harding property. The insidious fine print. A viper coiled within the innocuous. It wasn't just the easement itself, but its elastic definition. The clause lacked any real constraint, no term limit, no defined area. Crucially, it allowed the HOA to subcontract the work, meaning they could authorize anyone to do anything under the banner of utility maintenance. Fury surged through Elijah. This wasn't an accident, it was a deliberate act. Someone had known exactly what they were doing when they'd conceived this document. His gaze snagged on the signature at the bottom. Thomas Thompson, President, Harmony Oaks Homeowners Association. Thompson. The man with the lacquered hair and the patronizing smirk. The man who had pressed his hand at the town meeting while simultaneously dismissing his opinions. He snapped a photo of the rider with his phone. The flash briefly illuminated the room's vastness. Back in his apartment, fueled by stale coffee and a simmering rage, Elijah began to dissect Thompson's history. A cursory Google search yielded little, a LinkedIn profile brimming with corporate platitudes, a few anodyne articles on HOA projects. Then he struck gold, a forgotten news item from a local paper, 8 years old. Thompson, then a real estate developer, had faced accusations of exploiting zoning loopholes to erect a high-end condo complex on protected wetlands. The case had ended in a settlement, the details concealed. A coincidence? Perhaps. But Elijah trusted nothing to chance. He spent the next several hours dredging online archives, assembling scattered fragments of data. Whispers of questionable dealings, muted allegations of graft, all clinging to Thomas Thompson. Online forums revealed disgruntled investors complaining about shoddy construction and concealed fees in Thompson's developments. The more he uncovered, the more certain he became that Thompson was not merely a petty HOA tyrant, he was a predator. And somehow, he'd used that water rights agreement to pilfer Grandpa Zeke's heritage. Elijah shut his laptop, his jaw rigid. He knew what was demanded. He had to expose Thompson, whatever the personal cost. He had to unearth proof, irrefutable evidence that would withstand legal scrutiny. This was no longer merely about the farm. It was about retribution. Vivienne's discontent. Vivienne Sterling watched from behind her lace-curtained window, a half-eaten grapefruit spoon poised midair. The moving truck, gleaming like a freshly buffed chrome grille, was far too ostentatious for Harmony Acres. Most folks here had minivans or, at best, a sensible SUV. This behemoth looked like it belonged ferrying rock stars, not hauling boxes of Grandma's china. The man directing the movers, Elijah, according to the paperwork plastered on the HOA notice board, was equally out of place. He radiated a confident, almost arrogant energy that clashed violently with the pastel-colored serenity of the development. Vivienne narrowed her eyes. Something about him felt off. Harmony Acres. A monument to mediocrity, built on promises of quiet evenings and perfectly manicured lawns. It had seemed appealing, even necessary, 5 years ago. A refuge after the debacle in Chicago, a place to rebuild. But the quiet had become stifling, the lawns a symbol of suffocating conformity. She traded chasing hard-hitting stories for puff pieces on the annual bake sale, her Pulitzer aspirations gathering dust in a metaphorical attic. The Harmony Acres Herald, her current journalistic outlet, was more concerned with the proper placement of petunias than probing political corruption. Another cat stuck in a tree, another victory for the volunteer fire department, she muttered, returning the grapefruit spoon to its mission. The idealism she'd once possessed, the fiery passion that had fueled her career, was now a low, simmering discontent. It bubbled just beneath the surface, threatening to erupt. Elijah's arrival felt like a match tossed into a dry field, potentially disastrous, but undeniably interesting. He barked orders into a cell phone, his voice carrying clearly across the manicured lawns. Vivienne couldn't make out the words, but the tone was unmistakable, demanding, impatient. He surveyed the house, a cookie-cutter colonial just like hers, with a critical eye. It was the kind of look that could wilt prize-winning roses. Vivienne finished her grapefruit, the tartness doing little to dispel the sour mood settling over her. She'd almost convinced herself to embrace the mundane, to find contentment in the predictability of Harmony Acres. But Elijah's appearance, this blatant disruption of the status quo, had reignited a spark. She rinsed her spoon, the clatter echoing in the sudden silence of her kitchen. Elijah was trouble. She could feel it in her gut, a familiar churning that always preceded a good story. She dried her hands, a small smile playing on her lips. It was time to dust off her investigative skills. A quick search of public records, a few discreet inquiries. It wouldn't take long to uncover whatever secrets Elijah was trying to hide. Harmony Acres might be a sleepy suburb, but Vivienne Sterling was wide awake. And she had a feeling things were about to get interesting. Seeds of discord. The afternoon sun, still bearing summer's warmth, glinted off the hood of Elijah's beat-up Ford pickup. He was meticulously wiping it down, a ritual that felt oddly defiant against the pristine perfection surrounding him. Vivienne approached, her sandals crunching on the meticulously manicured gravel bordering his driveway. "Admiring the beast?" Elijah asked, not looking up. His voice was a low rumble, like distant thunder. "More like intrigued," she said, crossing her arms. "You're new here, right? I haven't seen this vintage model around before." He finally looked up, his eyes a striking blue against the backdrop of his sun-weathered face. "That I am. Elijah Harding. And she's not vintage, she's a classic." Vivienne chuckled, a sound that seemed almost foreign in the sterile air of Harmony Acres. "So Elijah Harding, the classic car enthusiast who's single-handedly lowering property values. Brave." He arched an eyebrow, a hint of a smile playing on his lips. "Lowering property values? Hardly. Just appreciating the unique charm of this place." He gestured vaguely towards the identical houses lining the street, each with its perfectly symmetrical shrubbery and precisely mowed lawn. "Unique charm is one way to put it. I prefer soul-crushing conformity," Vivienne admitted. "I'm Vivienne Sterling, by the way. I write for the Harmony Acres newsletter. Mostly fluff pieces about bake sales and garden club meetings." Her tone dripped with irony. "Sounds thrilling," Elijah said, a dry note in his voice. He tossed the rag into the truck bed. "I was hoping for a bit more freedom. Seems the HOA has other ideas. Tell me about it. They have a rule for everything. The exact shade of your mailbox, the acceptable height of your grass, the number of petunias you can plant. It's suffocating." Vivienne shuddered. "I used to be an investigative journalist. Now I'm writing about prize-winning zucchini." Elijah's eyes sharpened. "Investigative, huh? Maybe you'd be interested in looking into some discrepancies I've noticed in the HOA's financial reports." Vivienne's interest was piqued. "Discrepancies? I might be. But be careful, Thompson runs this place like his personal fiefdom." "Thompson?" Elijah repeated, filing the name away. "Well, Vivienne Sterling, I appreciate the warning." He grinned, a flash of something unsettlingly playful in his eyes. "And I appreciate you appreciating my classic." The next morning, Elijah parked his truck, carefully angled so that its rear bumper encroached just a few inches over the designated parking line. A small, almost invisible violation, but a violation nonetheless. He watched from his window as Mrs. Henderson, the self-appointed parking enforcer of the street, marched past, her lips pursed in disapproval. A week later, Elijah's lawn was noticeably longer than the others. Patches of clover dared to bloom amidst the manicured fescue. The gentle breeze rustled through the untamed blades, a whispering rebellion against the rigid order. Thompson arrived mid-afternoon, his face a mask of controlled irritation. He stood on the edge of Elijah's lawn, his polished shoes sinking slightly into the grass. "Mr. Harding," he called out, his voice tight. "You seem to be in violation of Section 3, subsection B, paragraph 4 of the HOA bylaws regarding lawn maintenance." Elijah emerged from his house, a slow, deliberate movement. "Am I, Mr. Thompson? I'll have to look into that." His gaze was steady, unwavering. The seeds of discord had been sown, and Elijah was patiently waiting for them to bloom. Thompson's retaliation. The first notice arrived nestled amongst the usual junk mail, a crisp, official-looking envelope from the Harmony Acres Homeowners Association. Elijah ripped it open, expecting another passive-aggressive complaint about his unmowed lawn, but instead, it was a fine. $100 for failure to maintain aesthetically pleasing shrubbery bordering his property. Elijah stared at the notice, a knot tightening in his stomach. The shrubs were overgrown, he'd admit, but $100. It felt punitive. He tossed it on the table, where it landed next to a second, identical envelope that had arrived the following day, this one citing unauthorized modifications to the exterior of the dwelling for the solar panels he'd installed on his shed roof. Another $100. He called the HOA, only to be met with a recorded message directing him to their website. The website offered no avenue for appeal, just a sterile FAQ section that vaguely referenced the governing bylaws. This was Thompson, no doubt. A calculated squeeze. Vivienne found him hunched over his kitchen table, surrounded by paperwork. The fines were piling up. A third one cited him for having excessive vehicle parking, his beat-up pickup truck, which he needed for hauling lumber, and his grandfather's tractor. "This is ridiculous," she said, picking up one of the notices. "They're just making things up." Elijah ran a hand through his hair, his eyes bloodshot. "That's exactly what they're doing. Have you tried talking to Thompson?" He scoffed. "Talking to a brick wall would be more productive." Later that afternoon, while ostensibly researching a story about the community garden, Vivienne overheard Thompson holding court with a small group of residents by the pool. His voice, normally oiled with charm, was now laced with a venomous undertone. "Always been a bit of a troublemaker, that Harding boy. Thinks he's above the rules. And frankly, I've heard things, disturbing things, about how he acquired that land in the first place. His grandfather, you know, wasn't exactly on the up and up himself." He lowered his voice conspiratorially. "Some say there were questionable dealings. Tax evasion, maybe even worse." Vivienne's blood ran cold. This wasn't just about fines. Thompson was actively trying to damage Elijah's reputation. She slipped away, feeling a surge of anger. She found Elijah chopping wood behind his house, the rhythmic thud of the axe a stark contrast to the turmoil brewing inside him. She told him what she'd heard. Elijah stopped chopping, his face grim. "He's trying to isolate me. Make me look like the bad guy. He's succeeding," Vivienne admitted, "but only because people don't know the truth. We need to document everything. Every fine, every interaction, every lie he spreads." "And then what?" Elijah asked, leaning on the axe. "Sue him? Fight City Hall? It's Thompson's City Hall." "No," Vivienne said, a glint of determination in her eyes. "We expose him. We show everyone in Harmony Acres, and beyond, exactly what kind of man he is." She pulled out her phone. "I still have contacts. People who know how to dig, how to uncover the truth." Elijah watched her, a flicker of hope igniting in his eyes. "You'd do that? For me?" Vivienne met his gaze. "It's not just for you, Elijah. It's for everyone he's trying to control." The breeze shifted, carrying the sharp scent of wood smoke and the faint sound of children laughing in the distance. But beneath it all, Vivienne sensed something else, the acrid taste of fear, and the growing scent of a brewing storm. Environmental fallout. Vivienne hammered at the keyboard, the staccato clicks a frantic rhythm against the anxious flutter in her chest. The press release was nearing completion. Each carefully constructed phrase felt like chipping away at the polished veneer of Harmony Acres. She scrutinized the text, ensuring it was airtight, damning, and untraceable. Harmony Acres HOA implicated in toxic waste scandal, jeopardizing water supply. Stark. Unflinching. Irrefutable. Set? Elijah's voice sliced through the charged quiet of her sunroom workspace. He stood sentinel by the window, his gaze hard on the meticulously sculpted lawns of Harmony Acres, a community founded on carefully concealed truths. Vivienne wavered. Doubt, a persistent shadow, tugged at her determination. Almost. But Eli, are we absolutely certain? Once this is public. It's already public, Vivienne. Merely suppressed. He pivoted, his gaze holding a fierce resolve mirroring her own growing certainty. They're contaminating the soil, fouling the water. How many more sick children, how many more unexplained ailments before someone cries foul? She assented, banishing the hesitation. He was right. This was bigger than her thwarted ambitions or Elijah's zealous pursuit of accountability. It was about the welfare of those who called Harmony Acres home. Agreed. Let's proceed. They operated with synchronized efficiency, finalizing the release and drafting an untraceable email. Elijah, employing a disposable phone and encrypted connection, dispatched the information to a local news outlet renowned for its hard-hitting investigations. Then, they endured the agonizing wait. That evening, the story exploded during the 6 o'clock broadcast. Vivienne and Elijah watched from her living room, the volume silenced, their attention riveted to the screen. The reporter, positioned near the creek bisecting Harmony Acres, detailed the allegations, presenting satellite imagery revealing disturbed earth near the construction site and cartography illustrating the potential zone of contamination. They even featured a hydrologist confirming the perils. As the broadcast faded to commercial, the phone began its insistent ringing. Vivienne ignored it. Elijah rose, his expression resolute. The repercussions begin. The following morning, Harmony Acres seethed with unrest. Residents congregated in hushed groups, their faces etched with worry and indignation. Accusations ricocheted. The HOA board hastily issued a denial, vowing a thorough inquiry. But the damage was irrevocably done. Vivienne ventured outside, ostensibly exercising her poodle Coco, but with the real purpose of gauging the community's mood. She caught fragments of conversations laced with apprehension and disbelief. A cluster of mothers exchanged accounts of their children's persistent respiratory problems. An elderly couple voiced concerns about their well's purity. The saccharine façade of Harmony Acres was cracking, exposing the decay beneath. Upon returning home, Vivienne found Elijah engrossed in environmental codes. The Department of Environmental Quality is initiating an inquiry, he declared, his voice taut with satisfaction. Inspectors arrive next week. Vivienne leaned against the doorframe, a rush of adrenaline mingling with a prickle of trepidation. They had done it. They had unearthed the truth. But she knew this was merely the opening salvo. The HOA wouldn't capitulate without a fight, and they had just painted targets on their backs. The mineral rights gambit. Vivienne squinted at the brittle parchment, the script a spidery dance across the aged paper. The air in the Harmony Acres Historical Society's archives hung thick with the scent of dust and forgotten stories. She'd volunteered, hoping to unearth something, anything, more substantial than the annual bake-off minutes she'd been assigned. Then she found it, the original land agreement between Silas Harding and the Harmony Acres Development Corporation. Hours she'd spent, tracing the faded ink, feeling the rough texture beneath her fingertips. And now, nestled within a clause concerning water rights and easements, it shone. Grantor reserves all rights to subsurface mineral deposits, including but not limited to oil, gas, and coal. Her breath caught. Minerals. Rights. Silas Harding. Elijah. She slammed the book shut, the sound echoing in the silent room. Back in her meticulously organized kitchen, the kettle whistled a shrill counterpoint to her racing thoughts. Elijah had known. This was his angle. This wasn't about some sentimental attachment to a dilapidated barn. It was about leverage. The doorbell chimed, and Elijah stood on her porch, his worn leather boots leaving a smudge on her pristine doorstep. He held a thermos and a small, apologetic smile. "Thought you might need some coffee." You looked pretty engrossed in there earlier. Vivienne stepped aside, letting him in. The scent of cinnamon and something earthy clung to him. I found it, she said, skipping the pleasantries. The mineral rights clause. He nodded, his expression unreadable. He poured coffee into 2 mugs, the dark liquid steaming in the cool air-conditioned space. Silas was nobody's fool, he said quietly, handing her a mug. He knew what that land held. And you intend to use it? Vivienne asked, the reporter in her surfacing. Elijah took a sip of his coffee, his gaze meeting hers. They built their paradise on my family's legacy. On my grandfather's generosity, which they repaid by paving over his life. Don't you think they should pay for it? What are you planning to do, exactly? She pressed, the gears in her mind already churning, crafting headlines. He set down his mug. I've sent a letter to the HOA. Just a little reminder of what Silas Harding rightfully owned. A reminder that beneath their manicured lawns and identical houses lies something a little more volatile. Vivienne felt a shiver crawl down her spine. You're going to drill? Elijah didn't answer directly. Let's just say the value of those properties is directly related to the undisturbed state of the land beneath them. A little geological survey, a few well-placed rumors, things might get a little unsettled. Later that week, the letter arrived at every Harmony Acres household, typed on Elijah's antiquated typewriter, its words a stark contrast to the glossy newsletters and HOA announcements usually found in their mailboxes. The letter outlined Silas Harding's reserved mineral rights and hinted at the possibility of exploratory drilling. It was a carefully worded threat, veiled in legalese and righteous indignation. Panic bloomed in Harmony Acres. The carefully cultivated image of tranquility began to crack. Vivienne, watching from the sidelines, knew this was just the beginning. Elijah had fired the first shot in a battle that would shake Harmony Acres to its very foundation. And she, the disgruntled puff piece writer, was finally witnessing a story worth telling. The reckoning. The air in the Harmony Acres community center crackled with barely suppressed fury. Folding chairs scraped against the linoleum floor as residents crammed into the room, their faces a mixture of apprehension and simmering resentment. Even the scent of stale coffee and lemon-scented cleaning solution couldn't mask the undercurrent of animosity. Thompson, perched on the makeshift stage, cleared his throat, the sound amplified by the cheap microphone. He tried for a reassuring smile, but it came off strained, almost brittle. Good evening, everyone. I understand there are concerns. Vivienne Sterling sat near the back, notepad on her lap, pen poised. Elijah was late. She scanned the room, recognizing faces from her forestry articles, Mrs. Henderson, the prize-winning Rose Gardner, now clutching a tissue, her eyes red-rimmed, Mr. Abernathy, the retired accountant, his brow furrowed in a perpetual scowl. All of them victims, in some way, of Thompson's iron grip. The meeting threatened to devolve into chaos when Elijah finally arrived, a small, battered laptop tucked under his arm. He moved with a quiet confidence, his eyes sweeping the room, taking in the tense faces. He nodded briefly at Vivienne, then walked directly to the front, bypassing Thompson's startled expression. I think we can skip the pleasantries, Mr. Thompson, Elijah said, his voice carrying with surprising strength. I have evidence that requires immediate attention. Thompson sputtered, his face flushing. Evidence? Of what, exactly? I demand to know what you're implying. Elijah ignored him. He plugged his laptop into the projector, and a spreadsheet filled the screen, a dizzying array of numbers and dates. This, he said, pointing to a highlighted section, is a record of HOA funds. Specifically, funds earmarked for community improvements that never happened. He clicked to the next slide, aerial photographs of the undeveloped land bordering Harmony Acres, the land that used to be his grandfather's farm. These photos show the clear cutting of protected wetlands, done illegally, without the necessary permits. The runoff from this activity directly contributed to the flooding many of you experienced last month. A collective gasp rippled through the room. He moved through the evidence methodically, falsified invoices, inflated contracts awarded to Thompson's brother-in-law, and emails detailing backroom deals and threats used to silence dissenters. Vivienne scribbled furiously, her initial skepticism dissolving with each damning revelation. Thompson's face was now a mask of crimson rage. He jumped to his feet. "These are lies! Fabrications! This man is trying to ruin me!" But the residents weren't buying it. Mrs. Henderson spoke first, her voice trembling but firm. "My roses, they died. They said it was a blight. But it was the flooding, wasn't it? The chemicals from that land." Others joined in, their voices rising in a chorus of anger and betrayal. Mr. Abernathy, the accountant, pointed to the spreadsheet. "Those accounting practices are atrocious. Borderline criminal." The tide had turned. Elijah had provided the proof, and the residents, finally emboldened, were ready for a reckoning. Vivienne watched as Thompson's carefully constructed façade crumbled. He looked smaller now, less imposing, his carefully cultivated air of authority replaced with a desperate, pleading expression. Elijah stepped back, letting the residents take over. "It's your community," he said, his voice calm. "The decision is yours." The vote of no confidence was swift and decisive. A unanimous show of hands, a collective roar of disapproval that echoed through the community center. Thompson stood frozen, his reign over Harmony Acres officially over. The air, thick with tension moments before, now buzzed with a cautious optimism. The long night was far from over, but for the first time in a long time, Harmony Acres felt like a place with a chance at real harmony. Harmony restored. The town hall hummed with a tentative optimism, a world away from the rancor of days past. Thompson's bombast had faded, replaced by a hushed anticipation as Elijah approached the podium. Eschewing his usual work attire, he'd opted for a pressed, though slightly creased, shirt and jeans. He carried within him the strength of his grandfather's memory, a bedrock of quiet resolve. "I'm new to this," he began, his voice a touch gravelly, but gaining confidence with each syllable. "Public speaking isn't exactly my forte. But Grandpa always instilled in me that if you believe in something, you stand your ground. And I believe in this soil. I believe in the people here." He paused, his gaze sweeping over the assembled faces. Vivienne Sterling, her pen poised above a notepad, scrutinized him with an unexpected intensity. He continued, the words now flowing with greater ease. "We can't turn back time. The development is a reality. But the future? That's still ours to shape. My proposal is to reimagine the remaining acreage, the land surrounding the houses, as a shared community farm and green space." A wave of muted astonishment rippled through the room. He'd kept his idea close, wanting to first assess the prevailing mood. "A place where we can cultivate our own sustenance, educate our children about its origins. Gardens, walking trails, perhaps even a modest farmer's market. A space for reconnection, to mend what's been fractured." He gestured toward the window, at the ordered rows of dwellings that punctuated the landscape. "We can't erase those structures, but we can soften their impact. We can cultivate something thriving, something enduring together." He displayed a simple, hand-drawn rendering of his vision. Gardens bursting with produce, fruit trees offering pockets of shade, children at play in a fledgling orchard. A long table sat beneath a vine-covered arbor, promising shared meals and fellowship. The silence lingered, thick and pregnant, before Mrs. Davison, the elderly resident of a nearby model home, tentatively raised her hand. I may not know much about agriculture, young man, but I understand community. And I ache for it. I miss knowing the folks next door. I miss the days when we looked out for one another." Her voice wavered slightly. "Count me in." One by one, others echoed her resolve. The retired accountant volunteered his expertise with ledgers. A young mother offered to coordinate activities for the children. A landscaper, previously reticent, pledged his knowledge of soil science. Even some of the HOA board members, formerly staunch advocates of Thompson's plan, appeared reflective, a flicker of contrition in their eyes. The atmosphere inside the room underwent a transformation, shifting from hesitant hope to tangible zeal. It was a spark, kindled by the promise of a brighter future, something palpable. Vivienne Sterling scribbled with renewed vigor, her initial skepticism supplanted by genuine excitement. Years later, Elijah stood at the perimeter of what had blossomed into Harmony Acres Community Farm. The sun kissed his face, and the air vibrated with the busy hum of honeybees. Children darted among rows of sunflowers, their joyous cries echoing through the orchard. The arbor was draped in grapevines, heavy with ripened fruit. He brushed his hand against the gnarled bark of an apple tree, descended from those his grandfather had planted. The houses remained, a steadfast reminder of what had been irrevocably altered. Yet they were tempered now, integrated into the setting by the flourishing green space that enveloped them. The community had been reborn. Neighbors, once strangers, were now intimates, sharing meals and toiling together in the gardens. The farm had become a nucleus, a place of restoration and solidarity. A smile played on his lips. He had honored his grandfather's legacy, not by clinging to the past, but by cultivating a future where community and nature could thrive in tandem. He finally grasped it. It wasn't solely about the land, it was about the people who inhabited it. Thompson may have built his houses, but Elijah, together with his neighbors, had crafted a home.